Hey guys, welcome back. Hey, today's episode brings us up to the year 1947 and the first show that could be considered a flop. However, it made a huge comeback later on in its history. So let's peel back history on Allegro. So Allegro is the third musical collaboration by Rodgers and Hammerstein. The musical centers on the life of Joseph Taylor Jr. as he follows in his father's footsteps as a doctor, but is tempted by an allure of a big city hospital. Hammerstein had long contemplated a serious work which would deal with the problems of the ordinary man in the fast-moving modern world. The production took a risk by having absolutely no sets, but instead used props and projections to suggest locations. In March of 1946, Hammerstein approached Rodgers with the idea for a play with two men as the central characters, rather than the usual boy and girl format. Over the following weeks, the concept evolved into a musical about one man, a doctor's son, which appealed to Rodgers due to being both the son and brother of a doctor. Although Hammerstein wanted a story about a man from birth to death, he was reluctant to kill off another man after having just killed his leading male character, Billy Bigelow, on stage in Carousel. Now, Allegro was conceived as taking place in an open space, using both props and projections to convey scenery to the audience. In addition to the usual singing chorus, there would be a speaking chorus, in the manner of sort of like a Greek chorus, which would comment on the action and speak to both characters and the audience. To gain background research into the medical profession, Hammerstein actually interviewed his own doctor, and he would also put a considerable amount of his own experiences into the show, with most of the first act being loosely based on his own memories of his childhood. Hammerstein spent a year writing and polishing the first act, while the second act was more rushed and being under a deadline. Hammerstein would complete it only a week before rehearsals would begin. Here's the interesting part. So Agnes DeMille, who was the choreographer for Carousel in Oklahoma, was hired on to direct, which is a risky move and is quite unusual for the time. So she had been concerned about the cohesion of the script, and when she approached Hammerstein asking about the plot of the show, he basically replied saying, "It's about a man not being allowed to do his own work because of worldly pressures." However, with no second act completion, the show was already committed to the theater in New York. So, DeMille was faced with an immense task. Instead of conventional sets, locations were suggested by platforms, images projected onto backdrops, and lighting. There were a whopping 500 lighting cues, and 40 stagehands needed to shift 60 partial sets, with objects moving onto the stage by a semicircular track hidden by an elaborate series of curtains. That track is still in today in most Broadway shows. Just a little fun fact there. Due to space and the fact that the show had 41 principals and over 100 dancers, rehearsals would take place in 3 New York locations for principals, singers, and dancers. DeMille not only serving as director, but also choreographing the dance sequences, which were both extremely complicated and providing the framework for the scenes which made up the show. So think about that. You have a director and a choreographer. Not an easy task, especially with this show. The most complicated parts are during the dances. So basically, Joe, our leading man, learns to walk, falls in love, goes astray, and then has to get back on the proper track. The first tryout in Connecticut did not go to plan, however. During the first act, William Ching, playing Joseph Taylor Sr., was singing A Fellow Needs a Girl when the scenery wall actually began to collapse, forcing him to hold it up until the stagehands were able to secure it. Dancer Ray Harrison caught his tap shoe in a track in the stage, which tore all the ligaments in his knee, and he was carried from the stage screaming. Lisa Kirk, the first Emily, actually fell into the orchestra pit while singing The Gentleman is a Dope. She was catapulted back onto the stage with no pause in her singing to great applause by the audience. And if all that wasn't enough, Come Home, a song at the end of the musical, a false fire alarm went off, and the audience began to push towards the exit. However, Joshua Logan, who was in the attendance that night, loudly ordered the crowd to sit back down, which they did in an orderly fashion. After all those mishaps and tryouts, Allegro would finally open on Broadway at the Majestic Theater on October 10th of 1947. Fun fact, the musical did attract over $750,000 in advance sales, at a time when the top price ticket for a Broadway musical was only $6. The mixed reviews prompted ongoing discussions of the show's merit, continuing well after the first night. DeMille had dancer Frances Rayner fired, with Rayner alleging that the dismissal was due to her union activism. So, after Actors Equity became involved, Rayner was rehired. More bad publicity came when the producers proposed to dismiss several orchestra and chorus members to cut costs, so the show might continue through the summer of 1948, and the fired performers also alleged dismissal for union involvement. In July of 1948, after 315 performances, the show would finally close its doors, with a surprising national tour beginning in the fall. The national tour would run for 8 months, which is much shorter than that of Oklahoma or Carousel. However, as it happens with most shows, success wouldn't come until the 1950s, when the musical would become very popular among schools and colleges because of the large cast with no star and the bare stage. In March of 1994, a staged concert version was presented by New York City Center Encores, with the infamous Superman himself, Christopher Reeve, as narrator. The Canadian premiere of Allegro took place in 2004, staged by the Toronto Civic Light Opera Company, and with full orchestra and a cast of 30, the production became one of the inspirations for the All-Star 2009 recording, becoming a major success both artistically and financially for the company. The failure of Allegro only partially tarnished the reputation of Rodgers and Hammerstein. Never again would the duo experiment so boldly and risk losing their audiences. From then on, they would stick to the tried and true. Allegro would mark the end of the Rodgers and Hammerstein revolution. Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to today's video. If you enjoyed this, please comment on what you liked or disliked. I'd love to hear from you. And if you want to see other videos like this, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe. And until next time, that's a wrap.